Welcome to this very special edition of The Lead on News 24. Our top story today may well upset you, so please be advised that what you're about to hear will make for difficult listening. In short, you're going to meet the monster John Harris, as narrated by the veteran investigative journalist who unearthed the harrowing story, Jacques Pauw. Just a reminder that if you are aware of child and women abuse in South Africa today, please, we encourage you to contact the South African Police Service at 10 or call the National Childline toll-free helpline at 116. Later on in the show, we end with our usual segment of On This Day in South African History. Let's get on with the discussion now. My name's Graham Robenheimer, this is The Lead, and this is the South African story. Listeners' discretion is advised. The story of 73-year-old convicted paedophile John Harris is easily one of the most disturbing in our country's long and dark criminal history. Harris, a British-born music teacher for school children who had frequented many towns up and down South Africa, was just recently sent to Paarl's Alandale prison for the grooming, sexual assault and double rape of a 9-year-old girl. In fact, he preyed on numerous women and girls, some of whose experiences only came to light for the very first time just this week, thanks in part to veteran investigative journalist Jacques Pauw, who joins me live now on the line from the Riebeek Kasteel district. Jacques, welcome to The Lead. So lucky to have you back.
Hello, Graham. Thank you.
Look, an absolutely grim story, and I want to keep true to your 3-part series on News 24 for our subscribers this week, and I want to give away too much. Let's begin here and tell the story sort of chronologically. In 1957, he comes over from the UK with his family. He's just 5 years old, and they land in Durban. Take us through his upbringing as a child.
One of the problems with the story is that John Harris only has a brother who he saw very seldom. They're not very close to one another. So it was very difficult to find any information about his upbringing. But as far as I could gather, he had a normal childhood. I mean, one doesn't always know what's going on in a family, but he had a normal childhood. But he impregnated a schoolgirl when they were both 17. Got married. There was a daughter was born out of the marriage, but they got divorced like the year after. So he was already divorced when he was like 18 or 19 years old. Then he started working in Durban in various PR companies. He went into public relations, and he worked for companies like Sun International and was apparently quite successful. He married a second time when he was around 29, 30. He married a 21-year-old woman from East London. He showered her with diamonds when she was on her 21st birthday. She was completely in love with him. Her parents didn't like him at all. And the union didn't have their blessing. Anyway, they got married.
This is Lynn, right, Jacques? This is Lynn.
Yeah.
It's not a real name, right? A lot of the names that we're using throughout the story won't be, right?
Maybe I should just say at the outset that to do a story about sexual abuse, and especially the sexual abuse of a minor, is extremely difficult because nobody can be identified.
Absolutely.
You can't identify the grandmother or a sister or anything like that, because then you also identify the victim. So yes, I interviewed. That's how I started this investigation. Let me tell you where it's. I'm a resident of Riebeek Kasteel.
Yes,
and I've been in the village for about 12, 13 years now. And I heard about the arrest of John Harris, and he was already arrested in very early in 2020, in January 2020.
Yeah,
I heard about the arrest, and then he disappeared out of town. So we kind of lost sort of contact with the story. Now, for 10 years, I had a restaurant and a bar and a guest house in Riebeek Kasteel, which he would frequent. So I saw him quite often. I never really spoke to him, and today I'm very sorry I didn't speak to him. He was incredibly popular in town, was a musician. He himself had a restaurant at some point. People loved him. People loved John Harris. He was outgoing. He was friendly. He was trying to be everybody's friend. That's how I heard about the story. Then he was arrested, and we'll get to that. Arrested in January 2020, he left town. I only picked up the story again after he was convicted, and he was convicted in January this year. He was convicted in January this year. Then I picked up the story again. Anyway, so when I decided after he was sentenced, I picked up the story again. It was very difficult to find people that knew much more about Harris than the man who played music and entertained everyone and was everyone's friend. He was, in a way, he was a very reclusive character.
Right.
Anyway, so one of the first people I spoke to was Lynn, wife number 2, the 21-year-old woman from East London that fell in love with him. It was an extremely difficult experience. All the women I spoke to, all the victims I spoke to are still traumatized. Because John Harris was not just a pedophile. He was also a sadist. He hurt many of his victims. And one of them was Lynn, this young woman that fell in love with him.
So he's 30 now. He's successful in the world of PR.
Yeah,
he's described it. They and Lynn are together. It's bushy-eyed. It's sort of fine in the beginning. Take us now from there, because in your story you start to weave in a little bit more of very sensitive detail about who we now come to learn what Harris suffered with and what that sort of linked to his prognosis as a pedophile later on.
So very early on in their relationship, Lynn discovered that he had an erectile dysfunction. He had to inject himself in his penis to get an erection.
Never heard of this in my life. It's absolutely...
No, I know. It is absolutely gruesome, isn't it? Anyway, so very early on there were sexual problems in the relationship. And he then one day he came back and he had sleeping tablets with him. And he said to her, "You sometimes struggle to sleep at night. Take one of these pills," which she did. She passed out. She woke up the next morning and she was sore. And she realized she had been sexually abused while she was, while she was asleep. It turned out it was Riebeek, the so-called date rape pill, date rape drug. And it happened again and again and again. He was a very forceful man. He had a strong personality. And Lynn somehow stayed with him. But now she's also into public relations. They have quite a lot of money. They have many friends. They had parties where he would play the guitar. And it happened again and again with Lynn, this Rohypnol episode. And she said that they had lots of parties at their house in Durban. They had apparently a big house. And it was always friends with children. He would invite people to come and stay even for the weekend, but bring the children with. So while the party was going on, John would disappear into a room where the children were sleeping or playing. And then one day, a friend said to Lynn, "Listen, your husband has abused my 3-year-old child."
Jeez.
Lynn confronted Harris, who became so enraged, he went to a lawyer and he sued the woman. He started legal proceedings against her for defamation. The woman disappeared. This was all just too much for her, but she said to Lynn that she had taken the child to a child psychologist. She was debriefed. There was even a video of the debriefing, and that the assault happened, but she disappeared. And then Harris persuaded friends to leave their two children with them so that they could go on holiday. The one was 9-year-old, the other one was 10-year-old. So the children were going to stay with Harris and Lynn for probably a week or 10 days. Now, during this time, Harris said to Lynn, but why don't you go on holiday as well? Take your friend with, go to Plettenberg Bay. I'll pay for everything. And she did. When she came back, she discovered a naked picture of the 10-year-old wearing her jewelry.
Sure.
She confronted Harris and he said to her, but this is art. What's wrong with this? In fact, if you were here, you could have participated in everything. And that's when she realized for the first time that he had a thing for children. He wasn't just sadistic towards her, he also had a sexual attraction to children. Anyway, she stayed with him. They left Durban. He was promoted, he was then working for a big furniture company. They went to Johannesburg, where they lived. Again, the same story, big house, lots of children. John would disappear at night. He would disappear into the rooms where the children were, claiming that he was kind of like comforting them and playing a bit with them and whatever.
And obviously, Jacques, just to interject there, I mean, this is during the darkest times of apartheid,
Oh, absolutely, yes.
The laws were a little bit more different around that time. Perhaps people were a little bit more afraid to speak out about certain things.
Yeah.
Perhaps people would hush under their breath, oh, he's a bit of a dodgy uncle. But other than this incident in which the concerned mother goes to the woman named Lynn, not an awful lot gets out into the public space,
sure.
Right?
Yeah. Anyway, at the time when they were in Johannesburg, he befriended, ironically, a group of journalists. He first started snorting cocaine. That went into crack, and he became a crack addict to the extent that he lost his job. He was kind of like they were down and out. I mean, they lost the house, they lost the cars, they lost virtually everything. There was an episode where Lynn left him. She decided she cannot take it anymore, and she left John. He kidnapped her for a few days, seems like 4 or 5 days. He kidnapped her, raped her repeatedly, assaulted her, and then kicked her out. He then moved to the Southern Cape, to Vredenburg, to start a new life. Lynn was now on her own in Johannesburg. She had gotten rid of Harris. He started this new life in Vredenburg, and then the call started to her where he said he's now clean, he started a new life, he's a different man, and he sent her an air ticket. She flew down to Cape Town, they got reunited, and the whole episode started over again. This continued for a few years, until Lynn finally left him. Now, Lynn is still today, she got married again, she's a professional woman, started a new life, but she's still extremely traumatized by what had happened to her and never quite understood why Harris assaulted her so badly and what was wrong with him. Right. Anyway, Lynn is out. Harris is back in Cape Town.
And then he meets this young girl named Sophia, right?
Yes.
Where
yes.
and
so
what year was this? Where exactly was this? And per your story, I mean, she was also of UK heritage, right?
Yes. So Sophia is now 40 years old. And it started happening when she was 13. I have the date in the stories. But anyway, she's now 40. She was then 13. She was one of the neighbors. So what Harris would do is he would invite all the children of the neighborhood to come and swim at his place. He was living in Plumstead then, in Cape Town. So he would invite the kids to come and swim there, and he would give them cold drink and cookies and cake and whatever. And he's with them in the pool, playing with them, throwing them in the air, catching them again and whatever. And then along came Sophia, who was then 13. She had just passed grade 7 and was going to grade 8. She was going to secondary school. Now, I met Sophia in a bar in Cape Town. I'll tell you a little bit more about it right now, but also extremely traumatized. Anyway, she's 13 years old, swimming at Harris's place. Now, she admits that when she went to Harris for the first time, she was already drinking as a 13-year-old. She was already drinking quite a lot of alcohol, she and her friends. Anyway, Harris discovered this and started plying her with drink. His favorite was brandy and Coke, and he would pour her brandy and Coke as well. So this was just like fantastic for Sophia. And I don't know whether you can use the word seduce in these circumstances, but they basically had sex for the first time when she was 13.
Sure. Well, groomed and abused and forced against her will.
Absolutely. Now, remember that he didn't just groom her. He also groomed her parents. Her aunt is a very famous ballerina in the UK. So he also groomed the parents. The parents were a bit down and out. The father was not working. The mother was selling pot plants at a shopping center. So he also groomed the parents and said he'll take care of Sophia and he will educate her and he will kind of like look after her. They mustn't worry too much. So he first got her hooked on alcohol, and then came the drugs. Everything. Cocaine. There was lots of crack smoking going on. He basically made her a drug addict. She said she wasn't taking drugs. Before she met him, she was drinking, but not addicted to anything. She became a complete addict. As I said, the sexual activity started when she was 13. You know, he took her to Mauritius, for example. They went to London together.
Yeah, I was about to say, there's a point where they go overseas, right? So they get a little bit of money. They go to the UK. I think it's the Isle of Wight, you describe it. They spend a little bit of time there and eventually find their way back to Riebeek Kasteel.
Yeah, well, I mean, what happened is from the Isle of Wight, he got a position, he got a job in Lagos in Nigeria. She wanted to go with him. So she got a tourist visa, as I understand the story. She got a tourist visa. Now they're in Lagos, drinking, there's drugs, whatever. And then in order to stay in Lagos for longer, they got married. She was then 18 years old. They got married in Lagos. Sure. She can't remember anything about the wedding. She said she was living in a haze.
Sure.
Anyway, so she's in. They are in Lagos. He made some money. They came back to South Africa, and in 2006 they came to Riebeek Kasteel. He had some money then. They opened a restaurant. She was the front of house. He saw himself also as a chef, and he was cooking a bit, and he was playing music.
This was 2J's, right? How do you pronounce that, Jacques? 2J's.
Yeah, that's exactly how you pronounce it.
Was it very popular? Very popular restaurant?
Yeah, because John was fun. He was playing music and he was making jokes, and Sophia was quite a looker. So they had a good clientele. When he arrived in Riebeek Kasteel, I think he was then. She was 20, and I think he was 53 or 54, 2006. They arrived in Riebeek Kasteel. I spoke to people who were here at that time. I mean, they all called her the child bride. She's very petite, very small, so she looked very young. But everybody, you must remember that the Riebeek Kasteel of 2006 was a very laid-back place. There were lots of artists started
It's
moving.
bohemian. It's
kind
bohemian.
of a
Yeah.
bohemian lifestyle. So people kind of accepted John Harris and his child bride. And it was also during this time that the same rohypnol kind of like disgusting kind of like things started happening to Sophia as well. She was then 20. He would rape her, give her rohypnol, rape her. Even at some point, and I don't go into any detail, it's too much.
Yeah, please.
He also offered her for sale to people in Riebeek, Kasteel. Yeah, but you know what? I didn't know whether anybody did it. And Sophia can't remember because she was too out of it. She said there were other people. She's not sure because the rohypnol would knock her out completely. She was sore the next morning. So, and she also said by then she found him absolutely disgusting. She couldn't stand him. His teeth was also starting to get rotten because of all the crack pipes and whatever. Anyway,
he was essentially a tuck addict.
Yes. Now, the reaction of the Riebeek Kasteel people are very peculiar towards John Harris. He was really loved in the community. And nobody seemed to have suspected anything except there is one woman in town, she's still in town, who Sophia took in her confidence and told her everything. The woman did nothing. And I asked her, so how do you feel about the fact that you knew that Sophia was raped frequently? Why didn't you do anything? She said, I don't know. I feel terribly guilty today. Anyway, Sophia disappeared in 2010. She left. She simply left Harris. She couldn't stand it anymore. Now, I just have to say that after Sophia left Harris, her life went downwards at the speed of light. She has been an addict virtually all her life. She was in hospital 4 times with, amongst others, liver failure. At some point, she almost died. She was in rehab, out of rehab, in rehab, out of rehab. And she's very honest about this. I met her in a pub in Johannesburg. She had a friend who had to support her. And she was crying and she was sobbing, and it was very difficult for her to talk about this.
Shame, man.
But 2 years ago, she went into rehab again and seemed to have been clean ever since and has started a new life. She's pouring virtually all her energy into animal welfare. And I think maybe Sophia will make it in the end. And she doesn't blame just John Harris. There were other people as well who abused her. But she said certainly to get addicted to heavy drugs and lots of alcohol at that age, in your early teens,
100%,
made a left a terrible mark on her life.
As you paint that scene, Jacques, they're around that swimming pool in Cape Town and they're drinking brandies and Coke. And he's constantly plying her with alcohol at the age of 13. I mean, like, I don't even drink brandies and Coke, and I'm turning 36. It's hard tack. Okay, the story shifts somewhat. Harris, through a musician friend, as you say, he's playing up and down in bars and stuff. And through this musician friend, he then meets a mother of 4 children who are living out in Joostenburg-Vlakte, which is on the outskirts of Cape Town towards the northern suburbs. And he meets this woman, Adrian. That's her name that we're using.
Adrian, yeah.
Adrian, my apologies.
So he met Adrian, who was then kind of smack in the middle of a divorce. She had an 8-year-old child,
whom we're calling Janice, correct?
Yes, yeah. So Janice was 8 years old, very shy, tiny little girl, and she also suffered from dyslexia. She was dyslexic. And Harris and there were 3 other children as well with Janice. It was 4 children. And immediately he zoomed in on Janice. He paid virtually all his attention to Janice. Gave her music lessons, bought her music instruments, would frequently bring her milk tart, which was a favorite dessert. And all his energy was spent on Janice. Adrian thought this was weird. I mean, why spend so much time with Janice? But she didn't suspect anything. Now, her fiancé then, she was then just divorced. Her fiancé then was a good friend of Harris. They also played music together. So he he groomed not just Janice, he also groomed Adrian. He also groomed the fiancé. And it happened frequently that they were having a braai outside, but Harris would be inside playing with the children. And that's also when I spoke to Adrian, she said to me, the worst for her is the fact that the abuse happened in her house while she was there, much of the abuse. And the first abuse happened when the other children were in the room with him. So he was watching television with the children. So the other children were around them. And he covered himself and Janice with a blanket.
And I don't think we need to go into further details.
No,
because
we don't need to know.
Yeah.
I mean, people will know where this is going. And then later on, so that was the sexual assault that took place. Became frequent. There were times when they were alone when he was giving her music lessons, which was, of course, the perfect opportunity to have her for himself. And then the rapes took place, and it happened over a period of about 6 months. In that period, she became 9. She was 8, and then she turned 9. And Adrian said she could see how her child was becoming quite isolated. She wouldn't go with Harris anymore. Something was going on, but she didn't know why.
All the while, Harris was obviously the nice and warm uncle of an image that he was portraying to the rest of the family, right?
Absolutely. This very nice, warm, friendly uncle that loved children. Janice told me, because I also spoke to her, told me that he would frequently say to her, "Come, let's go to that room." And she would say, "No, no, no." And she would walk away. She was incredibly confused. She didn't know what was going on. She said she really loved John Harris. He was like a grandfather to her. And she didn't know what to do. She said she was, as a 8 and 9-year-old, she was trapped in this situation. I mean, the family loved Harris so much that while this abuse was taking place, in December 2014, they took John to the family in Port Elizabeth for Christmas.
Jeez.
And there, of course, he was in the pool with the children the whole time and whatever, while the abuse was taking place. They loved him. He was very much loved by this family. But, of course, sort of like, Janice was also growing up. And towards the end of 2019, now she's 13, around there, 12, 13, a friend told her how she was abused. And Janice said, and she realized by then that what had happened was wrong and shouldn't have happened. So the friend told Janice what had happened to her, and Janice said, but the same had happened to me. And the friend actually persuaded her to send a WhatsApp to Adrian, because she was visiting the friend, to send a WhatsApp to Adrian saying, Mama, there is something I've never told you. John did terrible things. That's how the story broke open.
Right.
The next morning, Adrian took Janice to the police. They opened a case against Harris. She had to go for medical tests and interviews, and there was affidavits. And Harris was arrested in early January 2020.
And this is right before the COVID-19 lockdown of March.
Exactly.
So,
yes,
obviously the lockdown would have overshadowed a lot of that news as well, Jacques. So perhaps, news headlines would have been looking elsewhere at the time before this sort of comes around.
A further thing is that because it was COVID, the state was trying to empty the prisons. They didn't want all these prisoners in our jail. So he was released on bail.
That blows my mind. That absolutely blows my mind.
So he had also moved by then. As I said, I was at that time in Riebeek, Kasteel. He left immediately after his arrest.
Obviously, the communities. That's a small dorpie. It's a small town. Everybody's talking. And you so excellently put, and I just want to quickly bring this in, and I know it's a lot of context, and I'm trying to make sure that the listener is following chronologically with us as much as possible. But Anthony Charles Paarl is also a convicted pedophile in the Riebeek Kasteel town, and his arrest was the year before. That is crazy.
Yeah. Well, what happened is there was the baker in Riebeek Kasteel was a man called Anthony Paarl, also a British immigrant. He was around 2017, around there. He was arrested for raping girls of 11, 12, and 14 years old. He had to deliver cakes and baked things, bread, whatever, to the towns of Tulbagh and Wolseley. And he had a woman in Tulbagh who procured these children for him. And he would rape them in his delivery van next to the road. And in the end, the state entered a plea agreement, or they made a plea agreement with him, and he was only sentenced to 5 years in prison. He was sentenced in August 2019. Harris was arrested in January 2020. So the town was abuzz about pedophiles in the community.
What were people thinking, that somehow the two knew about each other or were connected? Because, Riebeek Kasteel is very small.
Well, they obviously had to know one another because Anthony Paarl was the baker. We haven't been able to find any link between the two. But you know what I was amazed by then is even after Paarl was officially charged, it had no impact on his bakery. People were still buying their bread and their cakes and whatever at Wicked Treats, which was the name of his bakery.
What?
Anyway, Paarl has now been sentenced to prison. Harris has been arrested. He left town immediately. And he went to live in Saldanha Bay.
Right.
A friend helped him with accommodation, and then apparently his brother paid for some of the accommodation and whatever. That's where he lived. Where he continued with his music classes. He was, again, very much the same as what had happened before. And
he's sharing his life. He's sharing his life on Facebook as well at the same time. So he's sharing snippets of that as well.
Yes, he wasn't hiding from anyone. He tried to speak to some of his old friends in Riebeek Kasteel, because he said to them, "I would like to explain to you what had happened." And his explanation was that Adrian was jealous because of the relationship between him and Janice, the young girl. And because of that, Adrian incited a child against him. And they said that's where the charges come from. It was all nonsense. Anyway, nobody would listen to him. They just didn't want to know anything about John Harris. But the case never really got off the ground. First of all, because of COVID. And then Harris was sick. At some point, he arrived in court with a Zimmer frame. He had all kinds of medical certificates. Apparently, at some point, he was going blind. He changed his lawyers. So the case only finally got underway in July 2024. Absolutely. The case got underway. And
well done
testified,
for me remembering all the dates. I know it's extremely difficult because we're talking about...
It's very confusing.
Sure.
So when Janice had to take the stand, they had arranged that, as they do with child witnesses very often, is that she would testify on CCTV from a courtroom next door, so that she doesn't have to look at her abuser.
And obviously it's in camera, so journalists can't come necessarily in. They can't reveal names.
Nobody's allowed. But when she had to testify, there was something wrong with the sound of the CCTV. And instead of having the case postponed once again, Janice actually decided that she's going to face him. So she went into court. Yeah, she was very brave. And she testified for 2 days. There was fierce cross-examination. Although she's dyslexic. And often people who are dyslexic have difficulty in remembering names and dates and things like that. She testified for 2 days. Adrian testified, a policeman testified, a doctor testified. And then when it was finally time for the defense, for John Harris, to put his case to the magistrate, he refused to testify, number one, and he had no other witnesses. So the defense closed their case without having any explanation formally, except in cross-examination. But they had no explanation of what had happened. And in the end, and the magistrate said this in her judgment, now it's also very difficult to get hold of this testimony, of the records of this testimony, because it's all in camera. Anyway, the magistrate, the regional magistrate, September, said in her judgment that she was left with the explanations of Janice and Adrian, but she had nothing from Harris. He offered absolutely no explanation. And therefore he was convicted as charged, convicted of 2 rapes, sexual grooming, and sexual abuse. So he was convicted. Then the case...
is he still out on bail at this point, Jacques? Or
yeah, he's still out on bail.
So he's still out on bail, okay.
Living in Saldanha Bay. Now, when it came to him having to, during evidence for extenuating circumstances, he still refused to testify, which was really kind of a death knell for him. Yeah. I mean, he has been convicted. That was the opportunity for him to get into the box, into the witness stand, to explain to the magistrate what had happened, to apologize to Adrian and to Janice, and to plead for mercy, which he did not do. So the defense simply closed their case. What was interesting is when the state had to present their final argument to Magistrate September, they submitted a Facebook page because the defense, his advocate, was asking that he be put under house arrest, or under, that he's confined to his place of living, because he was so frail and he was so sick. And he was sick. He had a serious heart condition. The state, however, submitted a Facebook page that he had written a few months before, where he explains that he is in Saldanha Bay, and he's sitting with his next door neighbor, which was a little girl, because he was giving her music classes.
What the hell?
And he describes how he went out into town to look for grenadilla lollies for her and whatever. He was doing exactly what he had done with Janice and other children. He was still continuing doing that.
Because he was allowed out on bail. Sorry, it's just, it's a mind-blowing thing. I don't understand it.
Yes, absolutely. So in the end, September sentenced him to 30 years imprisonment. but she suspended 18 years. So he had an effective 12 years to serve. Now, when you're 73 years old and you've got 12 years to serve, it's kind of the end of your life.
100%.
But then he was incarcerated. He was sentenced. He was taken down to the holding cells. And at 3:00 that afternoon, he was told to board the prison's bus, and he was taken to the Alandale prison just outside of Paarl.
Which, by the way, before we get to this final chapter, just paint the scene about the prison for us, Jacques. It's like most prisons in South Africa. It's overcrowded. We're talking about numbers gangs that are inhibiting the walls, within the walls.
This is worse than most because it's the second most overcrowded prison in the Western Cape.
Sure.
For the past few years, it had an overpopulation of between 180 and 220%, which means in a cell for 18 people, a communal cell for 18 people, there would be 35. And of course, lots of gangsters locked up in Alandale as well. Now, John was taken to the maximum security section of the prison. Because of the offenses he had committed. So he would have been incarcerated with very hardened criminals.
Yeah.
Before he went into prison, he had a medical checkup, which confirmed his illnesses. He had medicine with him, which was taken away. He was given his dosage for the night, and he would have gotten more pills the next morning. And he was led into a cell. At about 9:30 that night, his cellmates was getting worried about Harris because he was lying on his bed and there was no movement. They tried to wake him up. There was nothing. They called the wardens. I think there's 1 or 2 wardens on duty through the night, and the prison, the wardens phoned a doctor, phoned a district surgeon, who came and declared him dead. Harris had simply, 4 to 5 hours after he was led into his cell, he was dead.
Sure. In other words, he spent 5 hours of a potentially life term behind bars. He only spent a couple of hours in prison.
Yeah, and his death certificate says natural causes. So there was never an autopsy. There's been lots of rumors that he killed himself and whatever.
I was going to ask you,
how he could have killed himself because he didn't have enough pills. He only had the dosage for that night. And in fact, some of his cellmates saw him drinking his prescribed medicine. There's been lots of rumors that he's been killed, that he killed himself. Anyway, we don't know. There was no autopsy. The brother didn't want the body. So, sort of like in July, he was cremated by the state. And that's the story of John Harris. The sadness here is, or many questions remain, and I think one of it is, when I discussed this case with a psychologist, she said to me, how do you know John Harris is a pedophile? Maybe he's not a pedophile. We won't know. We will never know this because there's been no psychological report about him.
Right.
His advocate, the defense, should have asked for a psychiatric evaluation of John Harris, which they never did because he didn't present any case himself. So we don't really know who he is and why he did it. Was it what role did the fact that he had an erectile dysfunction, what role did that play? So lots of questions remain. All I can say, if there's any good coming out of this, is not just that we're rid of John Harris, But, I spoke to the wives and the abused afterwards. I even had a meeting with Janice, who's now 18 years old. I think she's about to turn 19, who's a lovely young woman today. She's had therapy. She's had a boyfriend for a time now who's very supportive.
Sure.
So she's doing
Remarkable.
well. And every one of them said to me afterwards, they felt so much better because they finally spoke about this. And in the end, they came out with what had happened. And that was important. We know about other children who were in fact approached by Adrian, who was on the rampage here to let Harris pay for what he had done. We know about other children as well. So there's certainly more victims.
Right.
But basically, this is it. This is the end of John Harris and what he did.
What has the reaction been in your neck of the woods in Riebeek, Kasteel, to the news? I mean, I've got a close friend who lives in the Riebeek Wes. You met him the other day when we were out pub hopping in the area. I sent him some of the stories, and of course it's behind a paywall on News 24, so people are very intrigued, if they're not subscribers, to read your pieces. Initially my friend was, is this the case of the baker or the restaurateur, and who was it? And so all of these, stories swirl, and they get legs, and people speculate. How's the reaction been to your remarkable piece of journalism, Jacques?
I've seen a few people in the supermarket who would come to me and say to me, good work, we just didn't know about anything. So I think people are shocked. I think they are maybe less shocked because of Tony Pennell. It's not the first incident in Riebeek Kasteel. But hopefully it makes people much more aware of the dangers lurking out there.
100%. And can I just add this comment? I feel like your story is a headline story. It should be one of those national talking points. And I think if it was revealed in the time span of like 10, 15 years ago, it would have been a much bigger story. But we've become so desensitized to the crazy headlines that we see in South Africa these days, Jacques.
Isn't it ironic that on the day the third chapter was published, there was this other story that happened in George, I think, about a girl of 4 years old that testified against her abuser. I mean, it is incredible.
Well done. It's an absolutely vile story. What an absolutely vile human being. May we not see more John Harrises in this country ever again. And
I think there are more John Harrises.
We just don't know. We just don't know about them.
Know. Yeah, absolutely.
What are you working on these days, Jacques, without giving away too much?
No, I'm taking a break at the moment.
I'm happy for you. I'm very, very happy with you.
I'm building a house. That takes all my time.
Jacques, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking us through the story. I know it's a lot to unpack, and often we as journalists, we don't talk about the secondary trauma that we pick up through the interviews that we do. 100%, right? Because I myself am very much an empath. I pick up a lot of the people's energies when I speak to them, and it really stays with you for a long time afterwards, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Jacques. I really appreciate your time, and we'll chat again soon on The Lead. Keep up the great work.
We will. Thanks, Graham.
New episodes of The Lead air Monday through Thursday at 7 p.m.
This is The Lead, and this is the South African Story with your host, Graham Robenheimer. I would just like to take this opportunity yet again to say that if you're aware of any child and woman abuse in South Africa today, please contact the authorities, the South African Police Service, as soon as possible at 10-111, or call the National Childline toll-free helpline at 116. If you'd like to read all 3 parts of Jacques Pauw's investigative series into John Harris, you can start off with his very first part 1, and that's from 28th of September. It's entitled John Harris, 73, jailed for double rape, sexual assault and grooming of 9-year-old girl. Ending off now with On This Day in South African History, the 2nd of October 1971. The National Indian Congress was revived after years of silence. Originally founded in 1894 by Mahatma Gandhi to fight discrimination against Indian traders, the NIC was South Africa's very first Indian Congress and inspired others like the Transvaal and Cape Indian Congresses and later even the UDF. The Apartheid government had forced it into inactivity, banning leaders and harassing members. But in the year 71, Mewa Ramgooban, husband of Ela Gandhi and a veteran activist, led the charge to bring it back. A key trigger was government's plans to rezone Durban's Grey Street area, which threatened the livelihoods of Indian traders. Though some criticized the NIC at the time as being too racially defined, its revival gave a fresh platform for anti-apartheid activism and kept alive Gandhi's legacy of organized resistance in apartheid South Africa. That's courtesy South African History Online, On This Day in History, the 2nd of October, 1971. I think we're going to end the edition there. Thank you so much for listening this week. My name's Graham Robenheimer, and so long as there's trusted news first, we'll always have the lead.